Hey everyone, Oli here, and this is my review of Dragonfire, the fourth and final story of the 24th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Sylvester McCoy as the 7th Doctor. Dragonfire is the 151st story overall, it's about 3 parts long, and it's written by Ian Briggs. So the plot of Dragonfire is as follows. At the Ice-World space trading colony on Svartos, the Doctor and Mel unexpectedly encounter an old friend. The penniless and desperate Sabalon Glitz has only one option to leave Svartos, to find the fabled Dragonfire treasure concealed somewhere in the depths of the planet. Joined by Ace, a teenage waitress with a love of explosives, the group venture off to uncover lost riches. Not knowing that Kane, Iceworld's ruthlessly intimidating overlord, will gladly murder them all to gain possession of the Dragonfire himself. Before long, the Doctor finds himself playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with Kane's mercenaries, descending through the ice caverns even closer to the deadly glaze of the monstrous dragon that lurks below. So that is the plot of Dragonfire, and in my opinion, I think Dragonfire is a pretty good story. It's a story that actually does well in laying the foundation of what is expected of the rest of the Sylvester McCoy era and the following season, and that's where things start really getting into shape. But I do think that Dragonfire does have its faults, not as bad as the faults as in the other couple of stories, but I think in here I think it does have some of it, but not all. Say that the production of the story was quite well done. I really like the Ice World sets, and I definitely think that the sets of this story are probably the best sets of this season. From the main shopping center, Kane's HQ, and the underground caves as well. They were stunning, and I really commend the effort made that was to make the story look good. And I like the costumes as well. They were all very interesting, especially the uniforms of Kane's soldiers. I was in awe of the special effects of the story, especially with Kane's face melting off, which was very impressive, even for 1987 standards, especially during a time when the BBC was so dead set on getting rid of Doctor Who. And even the model work of the ship taking off and another aspect as well was quite good. And I liked how a vast majority of the pantomime silliness was pretty much reduced. It actually helped this plot of the story, made things rather serious. Anyways, and I think the script was quite good, and the direction by Chris Clough was actually pretty darn good as well. And I think the plot was actually very good as well. And I liked how Raiders of the Lost Ark actually had a bit of an influence how the story was made. Obviously, with Kane's death by having his face melted off, which is pretty much the same how Colonel Dietrich died, because they both got their faces melted off after. No, I think the Colonel actually had his face melted off when he saw the Ark of the Covenant, and Kane decided to pretty much kill himself when he. But they were both exposed, but they both died by having some very bright light exposed to them. But there are some other references to other Hollywood blockbuster movies or from the yesteryears in this story, such as the holographic messages from the dragon, which actually mirrored Superman of going to the Fortress of Solitude to speak to his father Jor-El, and where the Doctor and when the Doctor and Co actually saw his holograms in the place where the dragon was, it actually does resemble the Fortress of Solitude in a way. Then also the dragon looked like a xenomorph from the Alien franchise. It actually came a year before this story, and I think some people were basically saying that this was basically Doctor Who doing Aliens on the BBC budget. Ace's actual name being Dorothy, which is a very blatant reference to the Wizard of Oz, as Dorothy, a young girl who gets swept up in the wind and ends up in a very strange role, just like Ace did. How she was trying to create a time storm in her bedroom, or actually no, she was trying to do a chemistry exam, but then she ended up getting carried by a time storm to Iceworld, and how that time storm happened will be explained later on in the era. And Andrew Cartmel was actually basing the Doctor's dialogue when Mel told him that he wanted to leave on The Watchmen, and the cafe may or may not be inspired by the cantina from Star Wars. And the plot was actually quite serious as well, as I think it is definitely the most serious plot of the season, as some of it actually deals with Kane manipulating and grooming impressionable young women to join his force with the sovereign coin that he had, which I assumed which was very dangerous, which was so harmful it can actually brand the palm of someone's hand. He did this to Belage when she was 16 and she had been with him for a considerable amount of time. and Kane pretty much mentions how he took advantage of Belage's feelings for him so she can pretty much do anything for him. And he actually tries to do the same with Ace, who's also 16, and he pretty much tries to convince her to join his side by using the sovereign coin to place on her hand, but then she pretty much rejects him anyways and tries to blow everyone up with her nitro 9. Though personally, I didn't really feel, and also there was another scene where Kane actually ended up killing all of the people that were on Ice World in the Nosferatu, Sablon Glitz's ship. But then he actually gets them all aboard the ship, and then he ends up blowing them up. I feel like he was basically a little bit the same as Delta and the Bannerman, but I think here was less impactful because with Delta, with he in Delta, we got to know the Navarinos a little bit more, but then here they're just random extras that they just killed off to try and make Kane evil of some sort. And of course, the plot of Dragonfire that does become very important in the last season of Classic Who, as it does explain how and why Ace ended up on Ice Sword. So obviously, if I assume that fans would know, who are familiar with the McCoy era or Doctor Who in general, will pretty much know the reason. But for the sake of the pacing of the reviews, I will not say anything until I get to season 26. So, and there were some pretty cool moments in the story. One of my favorite ones was when Kane was trying to convince Ace to join his army by touching the Sovereign, which would have branded her hand, which she rejects him by threatening to blow up the room with her canister of Nitro 9. And I think that was probably one of her establishing character moments. But obviously, I think her defining moment actually comes in Remembrance of the Daleks, which is the following story. But the scene where she was about to choose whether to join Kane's sort of forces or not, and obviously Mel was being restrained by some other Kane's men. I think that could have been the part one cliffhanger, but instead we get a literal cliffhanger of the Doctor without any indication or any known rhyme or reason to try and get to the lower levels of Ice World. So he grabs his umbrella, tries to scale the sides. So he climbs over the railings and he tries to use his umbrella, but then he slips and he's literally just dangling over the edge. And I think the script actually does indicate that there was a dead end for the Doctor to try and find a way. So the only way he could have done this was to climb down with no equipment other than his umbrella. And I think maybe we could have had some internal dialogue or have the Doctor saying something to himself to try and indicate this, but no. I did like how Mel and Ace actually were somewhere else, and they, after escaping from Kane, and how they actually encountered the dragon, and Mel obviously screamed, and I think obviously Ace had to go pretty much hide away. I think it was because Sophie Aldred I think she had a migraine or something, and the scream actually had to I think she definitely was affected by the scream, so she had to hide her face away. So I think the part 2 cliffhanger was actually very well done as well, and this was when Kane had overheard the Doctor talking about Dragonfire and how he pretty much broke the fourth wall and saying Dragonfire will finally be his. And obviously Kane's death is another memorable scene as well as ML's very brief departure, but they were all very nice scenes, so to speak. So on to the acting, which I think was quite good, and I think Sylvester McCoy does a brilliant job here. And I think this is where the Seventh Doctor's character is starting to go some change, but not the dramatic change that we see in the following story, but he's a lot less goofy than he was in the last few stories, and he's actually a lot more serious this time around. And so I'd say, but then he is a bit goofy in some elements, but it definitely is a mixture of what he does become in season 25 and season 26, and then a little bit of how he was in this season itself. So it's a healthy balance. I do like one scene there was one scene that was quite funny in the cafe in part 1 when the Doctor was actually trying to pet a dog in the cafe, but the dog just decided to bark, and apparently that was ad-libbed by McCoy himself. And there was another scene that was actually quite interesting when he was trying to distract one of Kane's guards by talking about some semiotics in order to so Glitz can try and go aboard the Nosferatu, and the Doctor wasn't actually expecting the guard to have any knowledge of it whatsoever. So the two were just pretty much chatting away, and I think it found it funny when the guard was saying how he actually finds it how he finds it how it's a relief how someone of his intellect can is with him, and like pretty much he can talk to. So I'm wondering how the Doctor actually got away from the guard. I'm assuming the Doctor probably knocked him out, or who knows, the Doctor might have hypnotized him. As we all know, the Doctor is quite capable of, well, the Seventh Doctor especially is very capable of manipulation. So this was very possible that the Doctor could have manipulated the guard into, or might have implanted some of the knowledge into the guard's head to try and distract him. But yeah. Yeah, and I also thought there was another scene where he actually jokes by calling Balaj an extensionist when Glitz was worried that she was going to kill them. And I think McCoy actually does save how lame the part one cliffhanger was with his comedic timing and his physical comedy. And he actually did work over with Toby Selby as because the part one cliffhanger was resolved with Glitz actually finding him, and the Glitz was able to Glitz reluctantly helped the Doctor to get him over the ledge. So that was another good scene, and I think his performance during Mel's departure was quite sweet, and I liked the hug that they had when after she told him that she was going to leave. Bonnie and Langford did a good job as well. Mel departs in the story, and it was, even though it was very abrupt, but I like how it was very well acted, and it shows how much Mel meant to the Seventh Doctor in a way. But there are some theories that the Doctor actually hypnotized Mel to leave the TARDIS so he can have Ace aboard the TARDIS. But I'll get to that. So I'll explain more in another story. Probably in the Curse of Fenric or talking about the Seventh Doctor in general, but yeah, there's that. So Mel, before she decides to tell the Doctor she's going to leave and to travel with Sabalon Glitz, she's with Ace for most of the story, and then whenever the two reunite with the Doctor and Glitz, they pretty much decide to work together to try and stop Kane. And so obviously, her and Ace get captured by Kane's guards, and whilst Kane is trying to convince Ace to join his force, and Mel is pretty much in restraints by some of his guards, but then Ace is able to help them escape, and that's how they encounter the dragon. And it turns out that the dragon was actually harmless. And at the end, she decides to leave, and she actually suggests to the Doctor that Ace travels with him. So that was another good scene. And we have the brilliant debut of the ever so wonderful Ace, and her full name is Dorothy McShane, which we only know her first name is Dorothy, which she tells Mel. And she's played by the ever so wonderful Sophie Aldred. So Ace is a 16-year-old girl from contemporary Earth. To be more specific, she's from Perivale, which is located in the suburbs of West London. She ends up on Iceworld because she was trying to do a chemistry experiment in her bedroom, but she ended up accidentally creating a time wind and ends up in Iceworld. And she works in the cafe, but then after a dispute with a customer over a milkshake, she ends up getting the sack. So that's how her and Mel decide to have a mini adventure to try and find the treasure for themselves, but then they end up bumping into the Doctor and Sabalon Glitz. So obviously she almost gets persuaded to join Kane's army, which she declines, and then her and Mel pretty much continue their journey until they find the Doctor and Glitz. So after Kane has been defeated and Mel decides to go off to travel with Sabalon Glitz in her place, and obviously Mel recommends that Ace travels with the Doctor, and Ace is asked by the Doctor, which she's more than happy to accept. Yeah. And it was a very lovely scene in which she actually accepted the Doctor's offer. And it was a very good scene as well. And Ace is, as we all know, is a very tough, destructive, streetwise, passionate, and incredibly brave. As we all know that she's pretty much ready to throw her hands against anyone that comes against her and or the Doctor or anyone she cares about. And the scene that pretty much establishes Ace was which shows how crafty Ace is when she blows up an ice wall that was pretty much blocking traffic with her nitron and explosives. Which ends up her and Mel getting captured by Balaj. much, but she just threatened to blow up everyone again, whilst with her nitronine after Kane tries to persuade her to join the army, to join his side, and that's how they were able to escape. So Ace's home life was very troubling. She mentions how she was expelled from her school because she blew up the art room as an artistic expression. We don't know much of what happened in her home time during the TARDIS, but we do hear tidbits of like traumatic events that happened to her growing up. So we do hear more of it and how it actually impacts Ace as a character itself, because Ace is a very complex character and definitely one of the more, if not the most complex companions in Doctor Who history, probably in the classics. Yes, but yeah, Ace also does have a tendency not to call characters by their names. And then she usually calls them nicknames unless there's something serious, and she actually has to call them their own names. Like for example, she always calls the Doctor Professor, but then she calls she refers to the Doctor as Doctor if that she is genuinely concerned for the Doctor or something is about to happen. And there was a scene where the Doctor actually tells her not to call him Professor. It's the doc, and he says, "Don't call him Professor. It's the Doctor." And Ace pretty much continues with that anyway, and that was quite fun also. But she also calls Mel Donut, which is quite fun as well. I don't know where that came from, but I mean, but the thing with Ace is we don't know where the hell she comes up with the ideas for her catchphrases. I remember she called Anselm from Battlefield Shakespeare, even though the Legend of King Arthur and Shakespeare are two completely different times, but it's still very endearing. I do think it's quite nice. I really like Ace as a companion. She's one of my all-time favorite companions because the way Ace pretty much gives a big middle finger to all the classic companion tropes, screaming, going, "Oh, Doctor, help me! There's a Dalek chasing me!" Or shit like that. So constantly screaming, getting captured by enemies. I mean, she pretty much subverts a hell of a lot of it, and it's just very evident in the following story. And I think she has the brilliant chemistry with Sylvester McCoy as well. And I do think that the Seventh Doctor and Ace is probably one of the best Doctor companion pairings ever. And I would like to think that Ace is definitely a blueprint of the companions we see in Doctor Who today, with layered character development as a result of their travels and the Doctor. And plus, if they want to do, even though we had companions that had a lot of mystery to them, for example, Clara, with how she was known as the Impossible Girl. So I do think that, yeah, I think with Clara, she pretty much became one of the most layered, complex companions after Ace. So that makes things a lot more interesting for her, for both Ace and Clara. And on to the side cast. Luckily, there weren't that many, which is, I think, one of the greatest strengths of the Seventh Doctor's era. They didn't have to rely on too many side characters to carry the story. The few that were there were enough as well. But so to start off, we have Sabalon Glitz making his third and final appearance in the televised Doctor Who. The Doctor may bump into him in the cafe, though he doesn't recognize the Doctor for obvious reasons, and Glitz has got him into serious trouble again. But this time he sold his entire crew to Kane and won the treasure map for Dragonfire in a poker game. But he's being pursued by Belage because he took money from Kane and he pretty much scammed them, and he was ordered to give the money back, which he didn't have, so which things became a lot serious for him. So as a result of that, they pretty much repossessed his ship, the Nosferatu, from him. And so he encounters Pudovkin, one of his former crewmates, and Pudovkin was obviously in the zombie-fied form because Kane had pretty much froze him, and that's how he was able to become like a zombie, and that's how the other of his crewmates were frozen zombies as well. And Glitz was quite nasty to Pudovkin, how he was saying how Glitz pretty much took all the best of their takings and how he was just not a nice person at all, or so to speak. So at the end, Mel decides to leave the TARDIS to travel with Glitz. Yes, as he initially was going to take Ace back to Perivale, but that doesn't really end up being so. So he wasn't actually meant to have been in the story. There was a character called Razorback that was meant to have been in his place, but John Nathan Turner felt that Razorback was too similar to Glitz, so instead of having Razorback, he decided to just bring back Glitz altogether. But then Glitz was okay, but I do think him Glitz selling his crewmate was a bit out of character for him. I mean, even though, yes, we do know Sabalon Glitz loves money, I think that's one of his endearing qualities, but I do think that Glitz is this person that wouldn't be willing to sell out his entire, literally sell his entire crew for some money, and I don't think he was the sort of person that would actually do that, because we are so in charge of a Time Lord. Even though he is very money hungry, but then he is willing to help others, reluctantly, yes, but not to the extent of selling everyone to save for money. But though this contest was actually removed, but it was hinted that Ace actually lost her virginity to Sabalon Glitz, which was just really, really, really weird, because Ace is like 16 and Glitz is like middle age, so to speak. So that was just very creepy and sort of quite weird, so to speak. But I think the expanded media actually mentions this, but I think when this was actually brought up to Sophie Aldred, who didn't actually know about it in the DVD commentary, she was obviously disgusted, because Ace is basically a child, and Glitz is this old man. So I don't know what the hell they were thinking, trying to sneak that into the plot. But then we do have scenes where Ace and Glitz were like bickering as if they're an old couple, but that's how I took of it. That Ace probably found him annoying because he was probably a frequent customer at the cafes. I mean, that's why Ace probably disliked him, not the fact that they literally fucked. After that was just weird. And then we have Belage. She was Kane's right hand woman, and she joined his troops when she was around Ace's age, and it was mentioned that he used her feelings for him to manipulate her. She does get tired of serving Kane, and she asked him at the beginning if she can take the Nosferatu too. No, sorry, the Nosferatu, so she can get away from him. But then Kane realized what she was trying to do and pretty much rejected her offer. So because of this, she tries to turn against him along with another member called Krakawa, and then they lead to their respective deaths. And her death was quite interesting as well, because Kane is Kane is a very cold character, a literal cold character. Like, if he touches you, that is literally your life over. She was a very good character, and I liked how complex she was. Although she aligned with Kane, there was some good in her. I would have liked to see where she probably would have survived or something. So she probably would have helped the Doctor, Mel, Ace, and Glitz to actually defeat Kane, so to speak. And then we have Stella, a young girl who disappears from her mother's side. She ends up on the lower levels of Ice World somehow, but they ended up getting. But she was actually found by some of Kane's troops, but then they get killed by the dragon, who returns her to the main levels, and she's reunited with her mother at the end. And obviously, the mother is the same woman that was complaining about the milkshake. And she was supposed to be a representation of innocence amongst evil, which makes sense because children are mostly innocent. But then the plot lacks an explanation of this, so it just pretty much looks as if it was just a little girl just randomly wandering around the sets because the writers had no idea what they were fucking doing in terms of trying to pace the story. And then we have the dragon. So the dragon was not an obvious dragon, but he was a biomechanoid that was lurking in the lower levels of Ice World and was assumed to be guarding the treasure. It turns out that the dragon itself was actually holding the Dragonfire, which was actually the energy source that was keeping Kanos Vartos, and he ended up getting destroyed also. Then we have Zana. Even though she doesn't physically appear in the story, but she does play an important role as to why Kane is so cold and evil, because they were pretty much like the intergalactic Bonnie and Clyde, and she was Kane's lover, but then she decided to kill herself because she doesn't want to stand trial. So her death clearly had a lasting impact on Kane, which made him a very cold guy. No pun intended. And of course, Kane is the main villain of the story. A criminal imprisoned in what seemed to be eternity on the dark side of Svartos, he became the ruler of Iceworld, and he wanted vengeance on those that captured him, so he purchased people to enslave them, and by doing so he would freeze them, which pretty much turned them into zombies, or at least have them join his side and his armed forces, so to speak. his body temperature was really low because a simple touch. Because if a human like literally touched him in one way, shape, or form, he would literally die. Right. And in a very weird twist of fate, he'd die if he was exposed to heat, in which his loyal mercenaries Balaj and Kurakawa were trying to manipulate. Kane also tried to get Ace to join his forces when he had Mel and Ace captured, but she rejected him. But when the Doctor actually he found Dragonfire, he demanded it, but the Doctor informed him that his home planet Paramon had been destroyed when its sun had a supernova, which ended up destroying the hit planet, meaning that even if he were to kill everyone and he got his hands on Dragonfire, his purpose for revenge would have been meaningless anyways. When Kane, realizing this, decides to expose himself to direct sunlight and pretty much melted his face off. He was a very cool villain. He was a very good villain, a very cool villain. Sorry for the bad pun again, but I liked him because he was very cold. Sorry for the bad pun. I keep saying cold. Manipulative, then calculating and deadly, and he obviously spoke in a very monotone way. Even though I know I criticized Delta for this in the previous story, but it worked for villains more so than other characters as well, because it actually suited Kane because it fitted with his cold persona. So on to the thought of the story. I do think that this story was quite rushed, as it was a three-parter anyway, so the rush was very evident in part 2, which did actually move a bit slow, but in the last 5 minutes the plot is pretty much resolved and they find Dragonfire and Kane overhears it. And I do think having Kane overhearing certain elements of Ice World is pretty much a way to make the story go a bit faster instead of having Kane just randomly appearing somewhere and taking it from them. But then in part 3, and I think everything was going at a rather breakneck speed, which saw all the tourists getting killed, Kane's getting killed by exposing himself to direct sunlight, and Mel and Ace switching places with each other in their travels. It wasn't too bad, but I do think that the speedy pacing would have been fixed if it was a 4-parter instead, but then obviously budget and the BBC wouldn't permit that, so it had to make good with the 3 parts. So I think a 4th part definitely would have made things a little less hasty, but I see why it was made last minute, but especially with Mel's departure, because Bonnie Dankwood was actually meant to have departed in Dragonfire, but because of like scheduling issues, they had to. Sorry, not Dragonfire, Delta and the Bannerman. But then, because of scheduling issues, they pretty much had to move her departure to this story. But in a way, it's good so you can at least say that Mel has actually appeared in a full season of Doctor Who. So she basically was there for a season and a half, so to speak. Lastly, as I said before, Glitz seemed very out of character. Especially when he sold his entire crew to Kane. Yes, as I said before, he's the sort of one that looks for ways to make money quick, but then I don't really think it would be the good way to write him for especially him trying to sell everyone out in a way. Literally sell people out just for money. I do think that was very out of character. He doesn't seem the sort of person that would do that, but with the Razorback character it would have made a bit of sense, but then Jonathan Turner being Jonathan Turner, didn't think it was a good idea. So speaking of which, let's talk about Mel's departure. After Kane's death and Iceworld is freed from Svartos and is renamed the Nosferatu 2, Mel decides to tell the Doctor it's time to move on and go home, which the Doctor agrees to, but then when Glitz says he's going to travel on the Nosferatu 2 and intends to take Ace back to Perival, Mel gets the idea to travel with Glitz instead of the Doctor to ensure he doesn't get into any trouble, and she recommends to the Doctor that he take Ace aboard as well, albeit via the scenic route. Although abrupt, it was a very sweet scene, although there was a theory that the Doctor had actually hypnotized Mel into wanting to go with Glitz so he can travel with Ace, which makes things less sweet when she realized this in The Curse of Fenric. Bonnie Langford is an amazing actress. She did a very good job as Mel. She was good with what she was given, but she didn't receive the best of writing. Even how she met the Doctor was never actually explained, because they just pretty much took that element from when she met the Doctor from the Doctor's future and then they just ran with it. She did a very good job, and I'm glad that she returned in the centenary as well. She's due to return in Ncuti Gatwa's season of Doctor Who, which is expected to air next year, I believe. So it'll be good to see Mel again. And plus, she actually did return in some Big Finish stories, so we do get to see a lot more of Mel. And I think this is where her character actually developed more than her character developed on TV. So to conclude, Dragonfire ends the very shaky season 24 in a nice way, which actually lays the foundation for this 24th for the rest of the Sylvester McCoy era. Though shaky, and the other story itself is quite shaky, but it's still quite enjoyable. So I also give the story an 8 out of 10. So that is a wrap for season 24. Join me next time as I review all 4 stories of the season. Thanks for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of Dragonfire and my review itself. Sorry if I do appear a bit I'm just I think I'm just a bit shaky at the moment, but bear with. So please let me know what you thought of the story and this review itself. Please like this video if you haven't done so already, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Follow me on my social media platforms below. Until then, ta-ra.